What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hatness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show are Sarah Norton and Steve Ray from Group Work, and we geek out on facilitation training, and what it is we can learn from conflict as facilitators. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, scroll down to the show notes to download my free one-page summary. And now, lean back and be ready to be inspired. Hello, Sarah. Hello, Steve. Hello, Group Work. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Miriam. It's good to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, very good. Thanks for having us. Oh, thanks for having us.
Yes, we are sitting here in Melbourne, recording live. You're sharing one microphone, so we're gonna...
It'll be interesting.
Yes, gonna test that a little bit. And I always start with the same question. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
Good question, Sarah. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, it's a really good question. I reckon I started calling myself a facilitator when I got my first job as a facilitator. But I reckon I was doing it a long time before that to some level. I worked with young people. I worked with adults and adult training. So using similar skills. But for me, I guess it wasn't until I did our year-long course in 2005 that I actually really stepped into I'm really a facilitator now. So I needed to do a course, but the skills were kind of sitting there, I think. It just brought it together a lot. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the same. I think I needed to do a course first. I did the same course as Sarah. In fact, Sarah was one of my teachers. So it's a good question. Do I call myself a facilitator now? I do. If people say, what do you do? I say, well, I'm a facilitator. So I give myself that name. But I'm aware that I'm not, sometimes in the role of facilitator, I'm not pure facilitator. Like I'm often being a sounding board or actually having an opinion, quite consciously to the group to challenge them. Mm-hmm. So that wouldn't, in theory at least, it's not pure facilitation because I've got a view, but it's kind of a standing in a role. So from that point of view, as facilitators can do that, I do that. I usually do it consciously. I say, oh, okay, so I'm not hearing X, Y, and Z. What about blah, blah, and blah? And then people, oh, okay, that's interesting. So if there's a role that's not present in the group, then sometimes playing that role is something.
And it's fascinating what you're saying about having an opinion, because this touches neutrality. So to what extent must a facilitator be neutral? Can a human facilitator be neutral? We're just talking about chatbots. And do you stop being a facilitator once you have an opinion?
I'm happy to dive in on that one. I think it's there's lots of layers to that question. And for me, if I'm going to hold a space where people feel like I'm going to support every single opinion, then yes, I need to be as neutral as I can. I think you're absolutely right. We all have unconscious biases, and a lot of our work is to seek out our unconscious biases so that we can stay that neutral. And Steve mentioned roles before. And so being really clear in myself that I've got a neutral, impartial role, and also to the group that that's the role I'm taking on. Now, it doesn't mean that I can, if I say I'm working with my colleagues and I'm facilitating a meeting with colleagues and I have a strong opinion, then I will always say, Steve, can you just take over the facilitation role here for a minute? Because I need to step in and say something from my perspective. But I think holding that role really strongly is really important. And you're right, we're not perfect. We're going to get it wrong sometimes. But again, being authentic and saying, oh, gee, I kind of put my opinion in there. I didn't mean to do that. I'll try not to do that again. Like, I just feel strongly about this or whatever. It also makes us more human and we can connect more with the group as well. So yes, let's stay in that neutral role as best we can.
And I think if you depart from it, just the main thing is to be conscious, like to let people know what you're doing, because I think there's nothing worse than a facilitator who is unconsciously stepping out of facilitator role and into some kind of consulting role and has no awareness about it. And suddenly you can feel the dynamics of the room changes because they know that that person hasn't got everyone's back equally. And I've seen people who are consultants actually try to facilitate a group and the group just turned on them. And that was just a lack of awareness about, the craft of facilitation. I mean, I think that for me was the big epiphany when I did the course that, this facilitation thing is actually a thing. It's a real thing. It's not like, can you facilitate this meeting? Which is what my experience was prior to doing the course. Many people had used that word, could you facilitate this meeting? And basically left it up to me and my idea of what that meant. Yeah. And it could be anything.
And a few things came up. One is the notion and I think that's how you phrase it, Steve, if you sense that there's a perspective missing, then you would step in and take on an opinion, which is maybe different from sharing my own opinion as a facilitator and thereby putting a different hat on.
Yes.
So it's still in service of the group. Something is missing. And then the facilitator not being aware of it and then the group turning on them. Yeah. And one of my questions that I always ask is, what makes a workshop fail? And for me, so maybe we can take a moment to just dig a little bit deeper. What happened there and where did it break?
I reckon it happens a lot because I think people conflate expert with facilitator. They put experts in the role of facilitator, like they run the meeting. And that's because they have the knowledge. So the idea that the person who has, the most important knowledge should be the one who leads a meeting, that's common. And it's crazy because, of course, that sends people into roles of being more passive and just going, they'll know. And so they become less... they contribute less. Our big thing is, many of our principles is that the wisdom is in the group. So as a facilitator, that drives you to stand back and to find out what is actually in the group and to encourage people to look deeper within themselves. What have they got, to offer?
I really like the fail question. And I think one of the biggest things for me that we see with people on our course and what they learn is around the unconscious dynamics and what we can trigger as facilitators. So if we're not aware of what's going on for us, say if there's conflict in the group and, we kind of get involved or we want to run away, then every unconscious dynamic will have an impact. And so if we're not, as Steve said, if we're not in that neutral role for starters and we're also not managing our own responses, then we are going to create this very unhelpful dynamic in the group. That's the biggest thing for me. Like the processes you can learn, all the other techniques you can learn, the skills you can learn, but us having our shit together, really.
Yeah.
That's what it's about. Yeah.
And maybe the risk of not being aware of what's going on in the group and bringing too much of our own energy dynamic triggers in is also impacted by being an expert or being in a specific position, because then we're not objective towards the outcome or towards the content. Yeah. So. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think the more we know about a subject, we need to know enough to be able to facilitate the conversation. So I remember running a workshop years ago on recycling gas bottles in Victoria. Now, I don't know the first thing about gas bottles, but they did. And I could read enough to understand the language at least, but then it's asking the curious questions or saying to the group, okay, where are we up to? What are the main things here? But as soon as you've got an expert part of you, you're going to be driven to want to contribute. Oh, that's the wrong idea, or that's the right idea. Then you've lost the safety of the group. Yeah.
Did you really do a workshop on gas bottles?
It was fun.
Yeah, I think there's so many things that can make a workshop fail, But I think I agree with you that it's when your awareness falls away, that's when it really becomes problematic. Because then that pure role of the facilitator is gone and the whole idea of holding a group safe, what does that actually mean? It's just words unless you realise that it's possible to do it if you are acutely aware of your role, which is to be of service to the group and to help the group do good work together. That's it, really. If you go back to that as your basic underlying principle, then you can be onto yourself for those other things. So, see, I don't get worried about being enthusiastic about the content. I get excited about it. And sometimes I do say, wow, this is amazing. That's good, But I probably make a whole lot of mistakes. Like I probably often say, oh, that's a great idea. And I know that you're not meant to do that as a facilitator, but I do. I get excited by it. And so, I think there's the pure facilitator and then there's other kinds.
Can I add something? So we are going to geek out on this because we love facilitation. One of the things as well for me is what you're saying, Steve, is that as soon as we are not kind of grounded and we're getting triggered by something in the group, say I'm getting nervous, say there's, the energy is going up in the group and I start getting apprehensive. Science is proving it all over the place, right? That the research is showing that as soon as we start getting stressed, we lose capacity to think as clearly. We start losing the resources that we built up. Our skills can go, we start to fuddle through it. And so for me, it's if we're not managing ourselves, it's not just the impact we have on the group, it's the impact we're having on ourselves and our potential to be the best facilitator in that moment that we can.
And then I wonder, where does authenticity come in? Because I also get excited and I find it very difficult to say yes. And I fall in love with other people's ideas. And I have the impression that in order to create the safety or the space for participants to be their true selves, which will help them to generate the best ideas, they need to be authentic.
Yes.
For them to be authentic, we need to be authentic. So, and there are some facilitators who, as soon as they get into the space, they change the voice, they change and they become this almost a chatbot.
Yeah.
And so where are the limits? How much authenticity?
It's vital for me. It's absolutely vital because for me, it's all about relationships and connection with other and with the group members. And so if I'm being authentically me, only then can they be authentically them. As soon as I put a mask up, then unconsciously they'll be protecting themselves. So and making mistakes. That's part of, like we often joke when we make mistakes, we did that deliberately, so you feel more comfortable. So you feel you can make mistakes, but it's about being real. If I'm real, they can be real. I'm vulnerable and that's a really big part of connection.
I think that's what happens when people think, well, I'm in a really responsible position here as facilitator. So, you have a lot of power. You've got to use that wisely. So I think then what happens is that responsible self comes out in the way that they behave, so that there's also responsibility, there's controlling, there's a whole lot of things that then shuts down some of their authenticity. And that is the problem, because they feel like they have to do the facilitation in a particular way that, is proper.
Yeah. Which makes me wonder, and maybe that's a nice bridge to come to your course, that whether we can learn to be authentic. It sounds as if we first have to learn all these self-control, these masks, this is what I say, this is what I don't say, this is how I really have to control myself, not to get too enthusiastic, but not too little. And then once I've learned all of that, then I basically have to come back to my authenticity because it became my second nature. If this is what you mean, how can you possibly teach that?
Well, that's so good. That's so good. I mean, we talk about this whole idea of going through a process from being unconsciously incompetent to being unconsciously competent. And that process of moving through that means that you have to go back to your blind spots. You have to start at your blind spots. And some of those blind spots will be you trying to control things because you haven't yet become aware of the fact that actually that's a part of you that is feeling nervous or anxious or whatever. That's the self-awareness stuff that's like key to the work that we do. And a lot of people go, what? I thought I came to a facilitation course. You're doing all this stuff on the unconscious. I don't get it. But by the time they get through to the end bit where they're really using those skills, the communication skills and, the facilitation processes, unconsciously, they get it. It really drops. They go, oh, right. Because then when things come up for them, like they get some kind of reaction to something somebody said, they're able to manage themselves, not control, but able to manage themselves and be aware that, I need to do something about that.
Thanks, Steve. I hope you remember the point that I was thinking about now. For me, it's about, yes, everything you just said, Steve. And I kind of think it sounds a bit weird, but a bit like an onion. I feel like our course, this is what it was for me, because I was a facilitator and I was doing facilitation. But then I came in and it was like a door opened and I went, Oh, I've been like in the entry hall to facilitation, and there's actually a big mansion here with a garden and of a whole village. Like it just opened up this other world, because for me, what it does is like an onion, it just peels back the layers. Because you're right, like we have all these parts of us that we have created in life, inner roles, we might call them, through formative years of childhood, through independence, whatever it is, our control or our fixer, our whatever it might be, and peeling those back and being able to really use the offering they bring, I guess, or the strength they have, but using it authentically. That's the challenge. And that's the stuff that I learned from the course. And so for me, Brené Brown, and I'm going to forget it now because I always forget my quotes, but she's got this beautiful saying. I think it's Brené. She might have got it from someone else. It's a soft front, strong back, wild heart. And for me, I feel like that's what something like that anyway. That's what I feel like we really offer. That's what I got from this course, was like, I can still be a powerful female facilitator, but with warmth and with care and with love and a bit of wildness in there. I mean, all that bundle is really important to me. So yeah, it's for the peeling back makes us stronger.
Beautiful. Yeah, it makes sense that we have to have the self-awareness. But then you mentioned that the first thought that I had while you described the journey you're bringing your course participants through sounds like a journey through the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you start with total overconfidence. You don't know anything and you're super confident.
Yeah.
And then you learn and you realize, there's the garden and there's a mansion and there's a back door and there are maybe 4 stories.
Yeah.
And then you get into the imposter syndrome. Oh, actually, I don't know anything. But then at least you're aware of what you don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, that actually points to the reason that the course we do goes for, the year-long course goes for 7 or 8 months, because as participants in that process, you have to experience that whole process. It takes time to process. And you're processing it and you're processing. We can have people come back each month and go, they say, wow, it's been an amazing month. And then the next month they, wow, it's been amazing. Like the things that just keep happening to them. And so we also do short courses, of course, but the amount of processing that happens in that unconscious field is much less. So yeah, they learn skills and sometimes, they do things really well, but it's limited in terms of that inner transformation. And that's a lifelong process. Obviously, you're always learning more things there.
Yeah, it's a maturity you have to go through. And I'm curious now about so there's a short course for facilitation and then there's the 8-9 months. And when I look at all these courses and at the moment they're mushrooming, there's so many facilitation courses and many of them are quite short and most of them focus on methods, activities. Yeah. In order to be a facilitator, this is how you design a workshop. Yeah. And I think we agree, and from the first part of our conversation, we didn't speak about any activity or any process. It's all about the inner work.
All about that.
So is it actually, can we still call it facilitation to go through a process of activities and methods? And
she's been on our strategic planning meetings, obviously. This is the conversation we're having right now, actually, and sometimes we get really excited about it, but we're just at the entrance of that whole wondering, because we think, well, it's great. You can be a great facilitator with self-awareness, but what else could we be doing out there? Who else needs this? And really, everybody. In this world that we're living in, which is so polarized and it's got so much kind of uncertainty about it, there's so much disruption, people need to be self-aware. They need to have that emotional resilience. They need to know, this is just a reaction that I'm having because of the blah-de-blah, instead of projecting it all out into the world. If you project out into this world, you will just go into a spiral because it's so full on. So I think, that's part of the question we're asking ourselves. Well, who else, how else could we offer this content?
Well said, Steve. And we often talk about our training being 80% the person. And then, so it's like that's what we offer, the foundations, because we can go out there as a facilitator, or we can go out there as a manager or a leader or a negotiator or whatever.
Or a parent.
These skills are for everyone. And like we could sit in a workshop for 2 days with people and they could say, what if this happens? What if that? And you go through all the what ifs. guaranteed a different one will happen the day after. So for us, it's about the foundations, which is why we talk about 80%. And for us, that's around having clear values, having clear principles, your self-awareness, which we've talked, we put a lot of emphasis on, and then skills, really high level communication skills. And you're right. The process is for us. That's the outer layer. It's important, but it's the outer layer.
So can someone go through the short facilitation course without having had the foundations? And then what is the risk of that? And I'm thinking of so many traumatized people out there, traumatized by having sat in bad workshops.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they have felt judged by the facilitator or judged by the group or just have wasted their time and life and good spirit. So what is the risk of giving a facilitation training that is actually not even getting close to the core?
Well, we wouldn't. I mean, the risk is it's happening out there. There's lots of courses around how to deal with difficult people, that sort of language, whereas we talk about how to deal with challenging behaviors because we can all be difficult, right? And it's this, like you say, this judgment. So for us, like our approach is I wouldn't feel authentic or I would not feel comfortable delivering a training in facilitation or leadership or anything which didn't have those core values.
But you're right. Well, what I'm hearing you say is that if you can't go deep, then what's its value? There are people who've just done the 2 or 3 day course who have been transformed through that process. Like they've just never looked at themselves. And in 10 minutes of reflection, using the model that we have, which is a very light, whimsical model that has bears and an owl in it, that's very play school-like, and people go, what is that? But it actually allows them to be quite open and vulnerable because it's not this kind of really heavy thing. And they're often, oh, wow. And so it opens a door, and if they go into that door, they just keep going. So that's what we do. We open a door really through the workshops and allow people that chance.
So if I understand it correctly, you're still covering the foundations and the deep stuff. Yeah. It's just maybe a little bit lighter.
Yeah. And it's like a taster.
Okay.
Rather than the deep course. Yeah.
So
people finish our year-long course and they say, I've got to start again. Because that, it's that feeling of the deeper you go, and I'm sure you have this experience, like a lot of facilitators out there will, like we never get there, right? We're never the perfect facilitator. There's always learning. That's why I love it.
Yeah.
It was really interesting. I was facilitating a group yesterday, 2 days. No, it's actually 1 day, this group. And they hadn't done any face-to-face. Hey?
Just felt like to.
Yes, just probably. Well, it did because it was face-to-face and everything's been online. It was the first face-to-face workshop that they had done for 4 years.
Wow.
They said, it's so different, isn't it? Wow, But then they were practicing, like by the afternoon, that kind of connection between everybody had really deepened and they were able to take more risks and be more vulnerable with each other. And I was watching them in their little groups. They were all off in groups of 3 and 4, practicing this one scenario where the manager was being kind of attacked by this group of staff who were really disillusioned, disengaged, didn't like each other. And they said, oh, how would you do that? Oh, go off, have a go. And I was watching this one guy and he was doing all the skills right. And when this person said, you did X, Y, and Z and blah, 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 blah. And he said, I can really hear what you're saying. And I just ran over and I said, stop. I said, that is so good. But did you really hear what you were saying? She just called you a bloody blah. Wouldn't you go, oh, wow, that's pretty full on? And you go, oh, yeah, I suppose I would. And that is an example of doing the technique and not actually being the authentic self. You've got to be authentic, but you can't. This is what's so tricky about it. You have to be anchored in that wise core, because if you are triggered by that, you will come back. You'll either freeze or you'll just react back.
Yeah.
So once you've kind of done that self-awareness where you have got the capacity to go, oh, wow, that really hurt me, but you're still centered and the person can hear that, oh, yeah, I could have said that better. But if you react with emotion, that will just set up a kind of, the loop that we live in, actually, the world that we live in, action and reaction, Does that make sense?
Totally.
Yeah.
And I loved it, this Yes, it feels so good and it sounds so good to have this textbook example of a reaction. Then would you actually do that if it really happened? No.
Yeah.
And that's why we need the longer practice to make it second nature.
Yeah. And for me, that stuff around principles as well, you know, to go in with goodwill, even if we're in conflict with someone, you know, for me to be able to say to Steve, I find this really hard to hear because it's really challenging me, but I appreciate it's coming from a good place, to assume that. So principles are really important there as well.
And when you say principles, I wonder, is it something that needs to be the same for all facilitators, or does every facilitator have to find their own principles they're grounded in? Because, for instance, I had interesting conversations with facilitators about some of the principles, like all the wisdom is in the room. Really? Always? Maybe not. Everyone who's in the room are the white people in the room. Maybe not. So to what extent? And these are statements that sometimes we don't even dare to say out loud because, we're the facilitators. And the wisdoms are in the room and we're these ever understanding people. And then we turn around when we're alone.
That's right.
We become so judgmental. So how can we find our own principles, or how do you help those who go through the course to find the principles that they can really authentically ground into?
It's a really good question. I'm happy to jump in if you're happy for me to. Yes. And I love principles. I get very passionate about them. And I didn't actually get them before I did our course. And I remember ringing up Glenn, who was the teacher when I was doing the training, like 6 months afterwards, going, I just found another principle. Because I think we can realize when they're getting challenged when we're running groups, which is one way to find them, but not a useful way, I guess. We all learn from our mistakes, right? But for me, what we do on the course is we get people to think about their values as a principle. So what are values? But it's very much about their own principles. I mean, there's lots of organizations or strategic bodies out there that have their own principles, and some of them are great, but we've got to own them. Like, I can't just take someone from a textbook and say, they're mine. It's got to be meaningful for me. So, you know, like a value of compassion, that would be a value. And for me, then we often put like a sentence with it for the principle, which is like the guiding statement. So that'd be like, everyone deserves, or I believe. So for me, like, if I've got compassion, then as a facilitator, I want to have unconditional regard for everyone in the group. We
act with unconditional regard.
Act with unconditional regard.
You might not feel it. Like, you know, things like compassion and kindness and things like that, they're feelings. And you might not feel kindly towards that person, but what would you be doing if you were being kind? That is the real key, because the feelings come when all of that reactivity is stripped away. And we're all works in progress, and that we are going to be deeply triggered at times. And in those moments, you just have to take a deep breath and say, that person is just like every single person in this group. They've got something to offer. And the fact that I don't line up with that particular way of seeing the world is not relevant at the moment. I've got to be able to hold them just like I would hold somebody else, because that's how you hold the whole group. If you start dividing, you know, the group up on, well, they're obviously a waste of space and they're the good people because they've got good ideas and they've got values like mine, then it's gone, right? The group's gone. But if you can hold the worst, you know, behavior in the room, there is something that you do to the group, because people say, wow, they see you as a facilitator holding a person who's actually got quite, you know, potentially an antagonistic view, or one that's really challenging other people. And you might just be validating the fact that they're holding that view by saying, well, you can obviously really feel how much passion you have for this idea. Do you want to say a bit more about it? Like, you give them some airtime, which is counterintuitive. You might totally disagree with it. In fact, if I disagree with somebody, this light bulb comes on and says, you need to validate them. Not for them, for you. I need to reflect back what I'm hearing, because I do not line up with what they're saying.
And then we have a tendency to make it our own, or to interpret and to put a layer on top of that, and thereby derail the entire session. Yes, thank you.
I just want to nerd out on this the whole time. I'm loving this. And this links back to the self-awareness stuff, because if we're having a reaction to them, we're not managing our responses. It also links to compassion, that our model is all about self-compassion. knowing that I have parts of me, like my inner critic, who I really didn't like for a long, long time in my life because they were so critical. They were so awful to me, like so much more awful than I would be to anyone else. But actually, I'm realizing, through the work we do on the course, that actually that part of me is helping me learn all the time. Mm-hmm. So if I'm in a group where someone is being very critical, I can go, oh, I've got one of those. It's just that theirs has taken over, but mine isn't yet. And I go, wow, this person has a great gift of learning to bring to the group. They're seeing stuff that isn't going well. Everyone else might be rolling their eyes saying, oh, here Bob goes again being critical. But actually, if I can meet that person and say, wow, what you're bringing here is a role of like really unpacking this and seeing what's going to go wrong. So we can't be compassionate to others unless we're self-compassionate first.
Yeah. Yes, which reminds me that what you said about the difficult people, in air quotes, they're not difficult. They just trigger something in us.
Yes.
And so often I have to remind myself, okay, this is not my mother.
Yeah.
Just because I react as if it was my mother doesn't mean that she is.
Yeah.
And then I can feel all this reaction coming up in me, which has nothing to do with the other person.
Yeah. No.
It's my memory and then be compassionate.
Absolutely.
And the other thing that I realized only recently, there was this one person in many workshops, always critical, and I called him my sand in the wheel. Yeah. With lots of compassion, but sometimes I would get annoyed.
Yeah.
And then suddenly he stopped showing up. And that's where I realized that something is missing, because what he was modeling for the group, that it was okay to be critical. It was okay to challenge me. It was okay to be just against everyone else.
Yeah.
And suddenly, as he wasn't there anymore, this role wasn't taken.
Yeah.
And suddenly everyone was in this agreeable space where suddenly there was something in the room that remained unsaid. Yeah. And I realized that the willingness to lean into this discomfort of inviting conflict and inviting these other voices that feel so good to leave them out, but actually actually not.
No. And you end up at a surface level. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that role, because we like to see people as being taking on roles. It's not all of them. They just happen to be stepping that role. You're right. That critical role, it's an important one in a group for exactly what you're saying.
I think that's why conflict is so incredibly important, like our ability to manage conflict, because it's when conflict pops up that important things are revealing themselves. And if as facilitators we try to move away from that dynamic because we want everything to be okay and people to be safe and all that kind of stuff, which are all important things, then we can miss out on the gold that's there if we can work our way through the conflict. If we can say, oh, wow, this has really got some heat in it. I can see there's a lot of reaction. A few people have got their arms crossed looking out the window. Okay, right. So let's just pause for a second and ask ourselves, what might be going on here? So it's like you take people out of the content, the task that they're doing, and ask that meta question, which is about making sure that you're looking after everyone. That's the maintenance, because we're all here together. We're doing this big work. And you might just pause it like that so that people can just process the fact that because everyone reacts different. Some people are going in there really full on. Other people might be triggering and past trauma. So you've got to be able to sit with that. Moving away from it is not going to help the person who's just felt triggered by it, because they're going to be waiting for the next time conflict comes up and hoping desperately that you move away from it again.
We were working with a client this morning, Steve and I were actually in a meeting this morning, and we mentioned the word safe spaces. And it was great because he said, actually, I want to talk about brave spaces. And I really like that reframing, that yes, we want to create a level of safety so that people can enter in and step into a safe space if they're willing to. But actually what we're trying to do is create brave, which is where we need those roles like that gentleman you spoke about to come in.
Yeah. Because it requires bravery to step up, to speak out, to challenge.
Absolutely.
And that's where the creativity lies.
Yes. That's right. And the welcoming a difference. Yes. And that's where we're going to great mind. We often say great minds. There's that lovely saying, great minds think alike. Well, we say great minds think differently.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Let's bring in the difference.
Yeah. Go back to the world that we're living in.
Yes.
The world that we're living in is crying out for people to be able to work in those spaces. Yeah. That is the space that we have. The facilitation space, if you want to call it that, which is the world now, is one where there's high polarity, high emotion, a lot of distrust. You've got to be able to work within that. You know?
And at the same time, we're creating our own filter bubbles, right? Yes. So through the algorithm, we just get confirmation about what we believe anyway.
Yeah.
I also met a lot of facilitators, but I think since you're training so many facilitators, you see them at their start. And I wonder whether the personality who feels attracted to the world of facilitation might be actually someone who is averse to conflict, who likes the agreeable space, who likes to bring everyone together and to collaborate and to have this kind of coziness. So how can we bring this together? Because it's something we have to unlearn then to really feel comfortable in conflict. And another layer that I want to bring in and that I'm curious what you have to say is that conflict is something that we learn in our families. Yes. And if I grew up, well, personally, I grew up in a family. We had lots of conflict. So we love each other and we hate each other very loudly.
Same.
Yeah, completely opposite.
But at least I know that, so I have no problem with conflict. So I can shout at someone because I know that this doesn't have to do anything with my love and I can turn around and hug them and then everything's fine. Whereas if someone grew up in a space where they were punished for conflict or being loud, with being ignored or being rejected, then all of this will come up in a workshop space.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do you train that?
It's a really good question. And I think that's the module that people really look forward to in the year-long course. And again, it comes back to ourselves. You're right, it's formative years. That's where we learn to how we deal with conflict. And sometimes it's not very resourceful. And some people can jump in and, like you say, be very confident about that. But if we do that unconsciously as facilitators, there'll be people out there who are not comfortable. Yeah. And the opposite. You're the opposite. I'm not comfortable with conflict. So I had to learn to kind of manage the anxiety that used to come up with me, before I do a conflict session or if conflict popped up. So it's about, when do I step in, and have I stepped too far or not enough, or all those things? It all comes back to the self-management for me. Yeah.
I mean, I think the good thing about it is you go back and you say, yes, okay. By the time conflict comes up in the course, you're thinking, oh, well, I'm learning about conflict. But you've had so much self-awareness processing that you're really conscious about your reactivity, because conflict will bring it all up, anything that's kind of sitting there. So even if people aren't learning about conflict, they're learning a lot about themselves. Yeah. So this is why we go back to the thing of, is it a facilitation course or is it some kind of, self-awareness, I don't know, emotional resilience course, really, it's hard to know sometimes. But I mean, people do learn the skills. They can be a facilitator for sure, but heaps of people leave the facilitation course and say, that was transformative and I'll never facilitate again,
I do want to share one little story about conflict. This was years ago. We had this delightful woman who was doing the course, and she came in and she said, I just don't get conflict in my groups. She said, maybe I think my groups are just lovely. I just don't get it. And then we did the conflict module, and she came back the next month and said, I've got conflict in my groups. I didn't allow the conflict to happen. So at a very unconscious level, she was keeping it all, as you're talking about, all light and happy and cozy. And she said it transformed. I went in with this awareness after doing that module, and she said suddenly it's all there. And it's all out. But she said the transformation that happened in the group, because she allowed the conflict. A group that goes through conflict and survives and, is facilitated well through, that's transformative for the group. Yeah. From the point of view of hearing different perspectives, of feeling stronger as a group, of having, just better relationships. It's a great gift. Conflict is actually a great gift.
As in every relationship. Right?
Yes, so absolutely. A
romantic relationship that never went through conflict will break with the first fight, and otherwise it will deepen with each fight.
And I come back to what Steve was saying before. I think globally, all of us, I think, in our team have been feeling the pull the last few years about the world needs facilitation. Yeah. And the world needs great facilitators who have the skills, who have the self-awareness, because we're not doing well globally. We're so fearless.
Yeah. And some people go, I'm not sure about fearless. That's reckless, isn't it? So we go, fearless is fearless, reckless is reckless, So brave, But I think What is a fearless facilitator? It's someone who's prepared to go into spaces and say, whatever turns up will be okay.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's maybe also at the cost of being disliked.
Yes.
I think that's maybe the biggest risk of facilitation is to this wanting to be liked and to be part of the group.
Oh, but it feels great when I crack a joke and the group laughs, right? It's great, isn't it? Yeah. And Steve and I, when we're co-facilitating, we co-facilitate quite a lot. I love working with Steve, and we have a ball. The group have a ball. It's a real validation for us, absolutely. So it's a real trap we can get into about wanting the group to like us. But actually, we also need to be an agitator in there and ask the tough questions and to challenge and to notice things and to bring stuff to the surface that is not being talked about. We call them ghosts.
Yeah, you just named there that dynamic within us that is related to a particular part that we know as the people pleaser, right? So we have to work with that people pleaser that is just wanting to kind of say, whatever you do, don't upset the group. Yeah. Okay, you've got to be liked. So we've got to now somehow metaphorically or practically sit down with that and say, look, it is important to be like, that is a good offering. But sometimes we're going to do things that are going to be really good for the group that they won't like. That's your job as a facilitator. So in those moments, that'll be okay. Not being like, we'll be okay. And we have to kind of do that reflection work with that self, because that needs to change within us. You know, people say, look, take me or leave me, I'm like this. And that's just not true. It will be like that if you say that. But if you think, actually, that thing that I've got going on there, that's a real challenge to me. If it's an unconscious action, the only way you can change it is to do that reflection work somehow, like talk about it, look at it, what's its gift, how's it trying to help me? Those kind of questions can help to shift that. And I think that's really important. Otherwise you just stay static, you know.
I think the biggest thing for me about the people pleaser, which I have to say, and I know, you know, gender fluidity on the female end of this spectrum, it is a very female thing. The people pleaser is often a lot stronger for females, and Mama Bear, and I've got a mother hen, a very strong mother hen. She likes to look after the chooks. But
Sarah will be doing something, I'll go.
And for me, it comes down to I've got to like myself. Because then if I really like myself, well, look, let's say what it is. I've got to love myself. If I don't love myself, then I'm going to be seeking it externally. Yeah. I don't need to seek it externally if I'm okay. You know, like, so I don't, it's taken me years and years to get there. But that to me is a really important step. I won't be seeking it because I don't need the love.
See, we're getting to the heart of it, aren't we, after this time? Yes. We're getting to love, right? This is where the heart is, because remember last week when we were with that group and there was a woman doing a role play and that had a few people who were playing her scenario, and it was about her standing in her strength, right? And it was amazing because when she was there in her strength and really acting from this place of certainty, she could be really like connected to this person, but also telling them, no, that's not going to happen. Yeah. And you could just see and feel that there was a lot of action that was really governed by love. You wouldn't call it, oh, she's being loving, because we have this idea about what love looks like, but love is about deep respect for another human being. You know, that's how I think it manifests.
I love this example, and that we're talking about this love and the self-love, because I think it's also a matter of responsibility. So who are we that we are putting all this responsibility on the group, that they have to love us, that they have to get, and then we're very on the slippery slope of judging them, because if then we have expectations towards them that if they are not meeting them, they will sense it. I think there is something in the room that we have expectations, and they were like, okay, we need to behave now. And then it becomes very toxic. I wonder, and this was, this thought was triggered by you exchanging your dynamics in the space. And I wonder whether we are not leveraging enough the opportunity of co-facilitation. Because if we have this, it's easier to lean into the good cop, bad cop. If we have someone by our side who compliments us and who reminds us and who will also give us the sense of, it's okay if the group doesn't love you. I love you. I got your back. I love you anyway.
Yeah.
And in a recent State of Facilitation report that Session Lab, I think that 1,500 maybe contributions, so who filled in the questionnaire. And there's a minority of facilitators who actually co-facilitate. And I wonder right now what the risk actually is, because we need the groups then to give us all this validation, and we might not be aware of.
Well, and if it's not that, then there'll be some other aspect of ourselves that'll be making up for that lack. Because you're right, it's almost like that person can help you self-correct by saying, "Oh, did you see that?" Like, "Oh, yeah, okay, thanks for letting me know." You know, so they can pick up things. If you've got a good relationship, you can pick up things that you're not realising that you're doing. But see, I think I don't know, I've had facilitators where I've just been looking at them and thinking, you have got a clear agenda, right, to take us from this point to that point. And that's okay, you know, I can see that that's what you're trying to do. But then I also feel like I can't say some things because I know that it's going to be counter to what you want to do as a facilitator, because you're saying, okay, so what we're going to do is this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to get to this point. And I'm thinking, it's already laid out, right? And that, I think, happens when you as a facilitator want to make sure that it goes right, it goes well, it goes to plan. You've got an agenda and you want to make sure that agenda works. And if somebody takes you off that agenda altogether, how good a facilitator are you in dealing with that particular dynamic?
That's a little control freak.
Absolutely.
Right next to the people pleaser.
Yeah. And look, I think for me as well, co-facilitation, it's interesting what that research brought back, because we have 15 is our cutoff, like one person for 15 people, assuming that's not conflict or it's not major heat or something. Anything over that, you need 2, because you cannot be scanning the group, be aware of the dynamics that are going on in a group, as well as running a process if it's just you for more than, 14, 15 people. Also for me, I want to be able to be my best in a group. And I know I'm my best in a group when I've got a co-facilitator who's got my back. And yes, I am looking at you, particularly Steve, because we've worked together for years and we have fun together. And so therefore we're relaxed. We have fun together. And that is a vibe that is really good for the group, and Steve will spot stuff. I'll spot stuff. Our different styles, they do complement each other, but they are different. And so we'll have different experiences. Steve will pick up on stuff that I miss and vice versa. So yeah, co-facilitation it's a joy for me. And if I'm enjoying what I'm doing, then surely I'm giving my best to the group. And that's what it's about at the end of the day.
We have some of our most creative, moments when we're with a group. A group will go off and do something and go, you know what we could do? We could do this and that. We've never done that before. Let's try that. Okay. And so we'll try something and we know that it'll go well.
We build. So we build on it, don't we? Yeah. And we could do, that
yes and.
And I think as facilitators, you never want to get to a place where you're just rolling it out.
Yeah.
Because you are just...
No.
Because that's, like you're saying, people pick up on whatever dynamic. They pick up on that kind of aliveness that you either bring or don't bring. And if you've got that, then that just does something to people.
Yeah.
Even if they don't learn anything, they go out and think, I feel energised. It's got to be a good thing.
Yeah. After all this training and experience, what remains your number one facilitation challenge?
Ooh, good question.
Look, for me, I have to say there's 2. And this is why I facilitate with Sarah, which is bad because I don't want to rely on you for this. But it has been a thing where, for me, having structure and being really well prepared, that is a weak spot for me. And when I'm facilitating by myself, I probably over-prepare because I think I've got this little part of me saying, you don't prepare well. You really need to prepare well. Yes, I will prepare well. But it's not my happy place. Like Sarah will be just, and she'll, map out a plan. And timing, I think we're probably both pretty crap at timing because we get enthusiastic. So you've got an agenda and you think, look, we're only 2 hours over time. No. Because a day can creep. And I think when that happens, you are kind of letting the group down, because you've said this is what, unless you're conscious about it and say, hey, look, we're 20 minutes behind. What we're thinking of doing is X, Y, and Z. That's okay because of, and if you negotiate with the group and the group's fine, it's okay, because sometimes you do need to go off on tangents, but you got to do it consciously. It's when you just get lost, then it's a problem. What about you?
Oh, there's so many. I think it's a really great question. Actually. I think my biggest challenge is still conflict. And it's not conflict in a group, because when it happens, when I'm running a group and if what we call pop-up conflict, if it's suddenly there, then I'm in the zone, I deal with it, it's fine. I feel very confident to deal with it. It's when I know I'm going into a space which has the conflict. So that's actually my biggest challenge, is managing myself beforehand. And I've spent years working on it and I'm still not there. Damn it. But it's just I think it's my mother hen she's so strong because she loves everyone in the group and doesn't want anyone to get hurt. So it's this real feeling of probably, I've got a responsible part of me as well. There's a little gang of creatures in me that want to, ensure safety for people. And going into conflict, I know is not a safe place for a lot of people, because everyone has their story with conflict and some incredibly traumatic stories with conflict. So I'm fine once I'm there and I'm fine once I'm running the thing, but it's actually the preparation that I get a little bit toey. I just have a chat with Steve. He's great with that. See, that's why co-facilitators are brilliant, not just in the session, but outside as well, because I know I could just pick up the phone and go, Steve, I'm going to be nervous. He'll just talk me down. It's great.
So would this be your strategy then beforehand? Because I can also imagine if you're going into the group with anxiety or with stress, this will spill over to the group.
It's funny. I don't think I go in with it. It's just the beforehand, if that makes sense. So it's like the build up. It's like the saying yes to the job. The anticipation. It's the anticipation. Once I'm there, I'm actually fine, but it's the anticipation. Look, my strategy, I reckon, is a lot to do with self-care, because if I love swimming in the ocean, I love eating chocolate, hanging out with girlfriends, all that stuff. As long as I'm doing a lot of my self-care, eating well, sleeping well, the basics, then I'm much better at managing it. It's more, that's my challenging bit, my learning edge. If I'm not feeling good about my self-care and I'm not resilient, I guess, then I know that part of me can sneak in. That kind of goes, it's really scary.
Yeah.
But if I'm okay, I'm okay. Do you know, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's definitely lessening over the years, but it's still interesting. It's still there.
And for instance, I'm taking cold showers every morning. And every morning there's this moment of, don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And then once I'm under it, it's fine.
Yeah.
But I hear it's similar to that.
It's very
the
similar.
Anticipation.
Yes.
Although I know that I survive and I know that I feel better afterwards. It's still like,
Yeah. I'm a cold water swimmer, so I absolutely get it.
Oh yeah. I learned 2 mantras here in Tasmania. I am that person. I am that person. I am that person, to go into the cold water. Yeah. And the second one was, you never regret a swim.
Yeah. That's one of my mottos. That's one of my mottos. Yeah.
So I got into the ocean.
Great.
It was cold and I loved it. Because
how
you never
good was it?
regret
No.
a swim. Oh,
and when you're in and the buzz afterwards, it's brilliant.
And I'm not a water person.
Oh, there you go.
Well,
Yet. Yeah. You are now, right?
Yeah.
There you go.
Never regret
Never say never.
I'm that person.
You are. You are that person.
Yeah. Given all this personal development stuff that we have to do in order to become facilitators, and we're training facilitators, and you did, how can you actually test whether someone is a good facilitator? How can you possibly put your stamp and test someone whether they're there? Also, given the fact that we're never there.
Yes. Such a good question. Such a good question. About how many years ago was it? I don't know, 8 years ago or something, we wrote an advanced diploma in facilitation. As far as we know, it's the only one in the world. We couldn't find another one anywhere, because I think it is one of those because it is a craft. And I think it is one of those things very hard to pin down. Now, we don't run it as a diploma anymore. It just wasn't worth as being a registered training organisation, blah, blah, blah. But we do still have assessments. And yes, it's hard to assess some of the stuff that we teach. So what we do ask people to do things like a creative piece, around their self-awareness. So we need to understand that they have an in-depth understanding of their self-awareness. We get them to write a lot of reflection, what we call reflection logs. So that's stuff around what happened in the session, what did you do, what was going on for you, what skills did you use, so that they're actually getting into a reflective state, because we talk about reflection being really key in learning. And we do some observation in the class as well. So that's part of our process. So we kind of try and cover it that way. But look, I think, in our course, just people, you can see them change as they're going. And then they give a presentation at the end, which is just divine about their learnings.
I think one of the things that we're always conscious of is helping remind people of what a responsibility it is to be a facilitator of a group, to hold that group. And because that's quite a weight, then together with their self-awareness, there's a check and there's a balance there happening where they go, am I up for this? Like, we don't produce these facilitators to think, oh, I've got the certification. Look, it says so on the piece of paper. I can now go out and do this stuff. We create people who get that and they go, yeah, but can I do this conflict? Can I actually do this? What do I need to do it? So in a way, what we've created, hopefully, is not people who've, forced into their head a whole lot of information and knowledge, but instead have got this self-awareness that says, I'm a learner. I will always be a learner as a facilitator, and I need to be really conscious of whether or not I'm up for this. So we have one of our blocks is all about what we call from offer to outline. So it's like you're facilitating from the moment somebody approaches you or you approach somebody, and you're checking out, is this group the group for me? Is this person who is wanting me to do this work the right person? Do they know about the way in which I'll facilitate, the principles that I use? Because some people just basically are going to say, I want a person to facilitate and I want this outcome. And if you're just kind of going, okay, well, you've already departed from the key principles of being a facilitator. So we have big conversations about the importance of being able to say no. So there's a lot of boundary work that we do and kind of comes up through that. So that doesn't really answer that question in terms of how do you know, but you hope people have enough awareness to know to err on the side of caution while also being aware if they're taking risks, but not, reckless ones.
And it sounds to me as if you're opening this door, and once you've tapped into self-awareness, you cannot step away from it. You cannot unsee it, right?
Absolutely.
It's a curse. It's a curse.
Yeah. And it does. It does. You can't go back.
It's the Matrix.
Yeah.
It's a spiritual program, right? It's actually not facilitation. Let's just get it out there, right?
Which then maybe now the next step, and we talked about it, that it's so important in today's polarized world that to spread the skill.
Yes.
So how to educate the world in self-awareness? Well, because basically that's then it.
Yeah.
And because I have the impression that many of those who actually need to facilitate, they're not even aware that it's facilitation what they're lacking.
No.
So when I speak to team leaders or managers and they complain and they have all this pain of dysfunctional teams and silent quitting and toxic behavior, and I'm like, the answer is facilitation.
Yes. There was a lovely article just recently in Forbes about exactly that, the overlap of leadership skills and facilitation, and how all leaders need facilitation skills. Exactly. Yeah.
But that's a really good question, because sometimes, in my more somber moments, I just think, oh, it's a waste of time, because it's that thing of the door's not even open. If people can't even know what it is, then you've got this thing. It's like, here it is. Now, what are you talking about? So it's like opening the door. We haven't even got there for a lot of people, because the culture is so strong. The behaviours, the way in which people work, so much dysfunction is normalised that people have just got used to doing workarounds. We'll just sack those people and we'll get other ones in, or we'll just send them off to HR. So you set up structures to normalise dysfunction. The fact that HR spends so much time dealing with people's, inability to communicate says so much, right? Well, that should not be a role of HR. That should be a role of people in the organisation talking to each other. Learn that skill. But people don't even know that it's a skill you can learn, that you can learn to deal with conflict. You can, and you should be able to learn that. So, yes.
And for me, in response to your question, it's step by step, because I know that we have a tendency to want to just go, like, we'll just change the world. But I feel like what we're doing in the work that we do, every workshop we run, whether it's for a government agency, whether it's in a charity, whether it's with volunteers, whatever, it's that, you know, the more people we can get who have that level of self-awareness and the skills, it's not just them, it's the ripple. And I think for me, that's the biggest thing, is the modelling. I remember working with a local government agency years ago, and I worked with one team on an ongoing basis for a few years. And what was divine was that whole council, like, I worked with that isolated team, and they were fed up with the culture in that local council, because exactly what you described, Steve. But then over the years, people go, I want to work with that team. What are they doing? That's really different. I really like what they're doing. And so the ripple effect was actually through the modelling. Because people are going, we're going to make a different choice here. We're going to be creative about who we are and how we're going to be. So I think, yeah, lots of things, like, we just got to keep taking those steps forward, but also the modelling we can do as individuals in the world is, I think it's incredibly powerful.
And then to remember that sometimes it can be transformative to be in a workshop.
Yeah.
So this, I think, experiencing how it is to be listened to.
Yes.
To finish a sentence without being interrupted, to feel safe of having a different opinion.
Yeah.
Maybe seeking more of those moments.
A privilege as part of our job is that we do create spaces where people say, we don't speak like this together as a team, or, wow, haven't we done brilliantly? We've got on so well today. And we're like, yeah, that was us. But it's a feeling of people walking away, having a different relationship with the people they work with or the community they're with, whatever it is. And that's changed forever, right? It's improved forever. So it's a great privilege what we do, really.
What's the future of facilitation?
Go on, Steve, over to you.
In the future, everyone will be a facilitator. Well, I think maybe the word facilitation becomes much more understood. Yeah, then maybe more people are doing it not as a thing, but even as participants in a group, they are facilitating themselves. We talk about the facilitatory participant because people say, oh, it's, you know, if you're a participant, you can't do anything. No, you can. That's actually, you've got the skills and you can ask the right questions to help a group do good work. If the facilitator's kind of left their post or doesn't even know that they're in a post, you know. So, I mean, hopefully that's it, that more people become outside the formal role of facilitator. They have the facilitator skills, whether it's in workplaces or, you know, family situations. I don't know how that's going to happen, by the way. Maybe there's going to be a policy change.
I think schools is where I would love to see this more, that our children in the world, the next, you know, that generation are taught facilitation skills from, you know, very young, like the self-awareness, the communication skills, conflict resolution. If we can filter in there, like, how different would our government look today? Like, because that's the models they've got, right? That's the leaders of our country who are abusing each other, shouting at each other, doing all that stuff. It's just, I feel you're right. It's like what we're doing is so counterintuitive. When people are open to it and they get it, they love it, but we're pushing against the tide. So I'm hoping the young'uns coming up are going to be the, yes, possibly.
Yeah. And what just came to my mind is I had an interview with a diplomat and someone who is training diplomats in negotiation skills. And what I wasn't consciously aware, is that politicians don't have facilitated meetings. They have a chairperson.
Yeah.
And a chairperson has stakes and has an agenda. It's not a facilitator.
No.
And whenever there is someone in the world that comes close to facilitation, it's a mediator. This means there's a conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not in their language. It's not in the culture.
Yeah.
But again, normalised, because everyone does the same thing.
Exactly.
You don't know what the difference is. I mean, I want to take up that issue of the next generation. The older generation has been doing that to the younger generation for freaking ever, right? And I think Greta Thunberg said it so well when she was at the summit, whatever she was, where she got really really upset, and she said, "This is all wrong. You are putting it onto us to save the world that you are stuffing up. You know, if you get this wrong," I mean, the kind of the summary was, "If you get this wrong, we will never forgive you." So you're not off the hook, older generation. Get on with the job. It's now. It's happening now. Don't wait for the younger people to come through, because this is a threshold time that we're in. You know, it's like we're watching the tipping points drop away moment by moment. And if we don't do something significant, if we don't match that rate of change that's happening kind of, you know, environmentally and socially with changes in the way our culture works, whether it's at a nation state level or at, you know, at the most tiniest level, then I think, yeah, we're in trouble.
We are in trouble.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just want to work with kids.
Yeah. And I can imagine that kids would be very good at that, actually.
And they're open.
Because they're open and they're very responsible. If they're put in charge of a process, and they're happy to remain objective if this asks of them.
I like what you brought in though, Steve, because I agree. I think you're right. It's our responsibility is now. And not the future is also our responsibility, but our biggest push is now. We've got to find ways around that.
Yeah.
By tomorrow, please.
Yes, tomorrow. Friday week.
Yeah, and getting more people to learn facilitation skills. And it's funny, I hear from some, but if everyone learns facilitation skills, where then the jobs for the facilitators? And I'm like,
that's our least of our problems.
Exactly. So
Put it that way.
exactly. So this would be a beautiful goal. And on top of that, I think just because people now learned how to cook, it doesn't mean that we're not going to restaurants anymore.
No, that's good.
And we actually appreciate haute cuisine and good restaurants even more the better we know how to cook.
That's great.
And what levels could we go to?
Yes.
Jeez.
Yeah.
If we're mastering masters and all that stuff.
And if our participants knew how to facilitate, this would be an absolute game changer of where we can go with the group.
Yeah. Huge.
See, I think what you're doing, Miriam, is so good. This has been such a hard interview to have, because all my facilitations go, what do you think, Miriam? You know, I haven't been able to do that. But I think, you know, doing these podcasts and just really pushing the boundaries on what we should be doing in the facilitation world needs to happen. We need to say it's not good enough.
Yeah.
You know, do better. Do something you've never done before. You know, take that risk and see what is born when you do. Because that will be when there are breakthrough moments, you know. Yeah. So hopefully that is going to happen more, I hope.
What else can I say? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's been fun.
Yeah.
And thanks for the work you're doing.
Yeah.
Like spreading the word.
It is really inspiring. And you've got to keep this in the podcast. You can't take this out.
Yes. And I will put the link to group work and to the work you're doing and the courses in the show notes.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Miriam.
Thank you for staying tuned and for listening to the show. I know how busy you are, and I appreciate that you're sharing your two most valuable resources with me and my guest, your time and your attention. If you're looking for more conversation with other facilitators and for a community of practice, why don't you join Never Done Before, the community that I have built, and many of my podcast guests are already members. Visit neverdonebefore.org, and I wish to see you there.